We're going to have two lectures today. One is going to be from Elin Slavick, and she's an art professor here of theory and practice at UNC. She teaches a course this semester for the first time called Visualizing Science. That's how we kind of found out about each other and met for the first time. She's exhibited internationally. She's got some pictures on her webpage. This was my favorite one of hers from Workers Dreaming. And so this was pictures of different workers all over the world, it looked like. Very different occupations, just showing them as they were dreaming. She's a curator, critic, and activist. And there's an emailed PDF that I sent you that has more information on critique. But she's going to walk us through here some examples to give us a feeling for what that looks like. And I'll let you go ahead and start.
Thanks. Yeah, I want to thank Russ for having me here, and also he helped me a lot with my class because, as he said, it's the first time I've taught it. And it sort of came out of Dan Ariely, who's a behavior economist at Duke, and he came to campus and suggested this class, and I was the one who was like, okay, I'll try teaching it. And I'm just going to give like a quick introduction before I get into the critique thing. The reason why I'm teaching it, and it's kind of cool to be talking about this to you guys because it's a whole different language, is that my own work recently, I just had a book come out called After Hiroshima, and it's work I did in Japan of A-bombed objects from the Peace Museum that I put on cyanotype paper or sun-sensitive, UV-sensitive paper, and they leave a white shadow like the shadows that were left at the time of the A-bomb. And I also put A-bombed objects on X-ray film to see if the lingering radiation exposed the X-ray film. And I came to that because my husband is an epidemiologist, and he studies the effects of radiation on nuclear workers all over the world. He's actually in France right now, working on an international study that he does often. So my work has overlapped with his and entered into this sort of scientific discourse in some ways, but I really am an artist. And I'm not saying that as an excuse, but my language is totally different from yours. And so we just had our first critique on last week on Wednesday, and we ran out of time. And so we finished yesterday, and I'm going to show you a few examples from that critique. This is one of them. So the class has about 16 people, half of whom are studio art majors, and the other half are some sort of scientific major, like biology, or I don't think there's a computer. Can you major in computer science? I don't think there's a computer science major. I'm sorry.
You didn't used to could. It was only recently, okay. Yeah.
But 4 of the science people are graduate students in biology and physics, and I have a physics grad student TA or GRC. So it's an interesting mix of students, and I have this little dream that someday people like the two of us will team teach this class, because he could have offered a lot in the critique in terms of the language you guys use and what you do that I don't have, and I can offer a lot to what you guys do with the language I have that you don't have. So with that said, this is one of the graduate students' work, and just by way of critique, okay, I'm going to do this little intro on them. I understand that what you guys do critiques on each other's work is of images that you post online, that you're trying to demonstrate or visualize some scientific data, right? So I don't often look at that, although there are times, because I sit next to my husband a lot, where his graphs and things look beautiful. Like I respond to them just visually, and I give him some tips, but I don't really know half the time what I'm looking at in his graphs even. Like I can't understand, even though there's a code and a system. I don't know how to read that system. I don't know how to make sense of that system. So it's different, but in the art department and in most art departments, I think all over the world, but definitely in the United States, I think we spend about half our time at least on critiques. And the critiques are not done online. They're done like, our classes are not like this. Like he even says it. It's kind of, so this book, which I sent you a PDF of in progress. Now it's a book, but the PDF was sent before the book. He was actually my professor in graduate school, and he wrote the essay in my book on Hiroshima, but he's a friend. He was my teacher 20 years ago. And I just want to read you the very beginning because it's so fun. I think it's really funny about how critiques kind of work. And it says, a critique is an opportunity to see how your work looks to other people. The ingredients are you, your work, and people. Some of those people have authority and some don't. Some make sense and some don't. Some are helpful and others have their own agendas. Critiques take place in space, often a cinder block room with a concrete slab floor or a classroom repurposed, which is really true in our department. We usually don't even have working lights. In time, from 5 minutes to 6 hours, in language, sometimes very obtruse and philosophic, sometimes technical, and in gestures. People walk and point and mimic art making. And then he has this whole list of what what critiques can be. And so the idea that we are all together actually looking at an object that people have made by hand is a very different thing than analyzing a computer or digital image. But people did actually present some work online in videos. So this is one of the graduate students, Maria Schatz. Some of you might know her, I don't know, she's in, but actually I don't think she's a graduate student. I think she already got her degree and she's working in a lab. And so this class is designed where they've picked a scientist to work with. Dan Ariely organized all these scientists to come to the class and they paired off. And she's working with Courtney Fitzpatrick, who is a postdoc at Duke. She was actually one of my undergrads when I first started teaching 20 years ago here. And then she went on to get her PhD at Duke in animal behavior. And so she's both an artist. She has actually a book published on her photographs of baboon studies in Kenya. Donna Haraway wrote the introduction to it, which is pretty amazing. So she and two of the other grad students are working with Courtney Fitzpatrick on animal behavior issues. So there's lots of ways you can do critiques, and I guess you guys probably all do them online. You write them,
We're going to do some online, written,
Okay.
and then we'll have in class afterwards kind of walkthroughs of things. So we're
Okay.
kind of going to be doing both.
Okay, so there's lots of ways. He goes through lots of ways, and I'll tell you the ways I generally do it, and they have very different outcomes. And I've come upon a new way in the last 2 years that is incredibly successful. Not even new, but new for me. Usually the student doesn't say anything, and they don't even tell you what it is they're trying to communicate in the work. They just show the work. In your case, I think you'd have to indicate what you're trying to communicate, because that's the whole point, is the data and being able to understand it. But in art, there isn't necessarily hard data. It might be an emotion, it might be a memory, it might be a specific idea, but it can be a lot of different things. So we don't have the student speak, because they'll just talk the whole thing away, and then there'll be nothing left to interpret or figure out, because they'll just tell you everything. And also they'll go on and on. So usually the class talks for about 10 to 15 minutes, and then the student responds. Sometimes there's specific questions like, did you mean for that to be fuchsia pink? Or why is that on the white paper? I mean, did you not have a second piece of brown paper? But they're just not even there. The other way that he says some people do it is that it's like a silent critique and the teacher doesn't talk, which he says is a waste of time and a lost opportunity, which I agree with, because I've been teaching 20 years. I have a lot of experience. It's silly not to offer your knowledge and your ideas. But what I've been doing in the last couple years is we put the work up, and usually there's about 8 people at a time in the room, like with their work up all over the walls, and then they take it down in a 10-minute break, and we put up the next 8 people. And the students spend 10 minutes just walking around the room and writing down like a few sentences on each piece. And what I found that's forced the students to do is to actually take their ideas seriously and to actually construct them into sentences, and not, because he talks about this a lot, and there's transcribed critiques in here, including one of mine when I was a graduate student, that is absurd. I mean, people just say the most insane things, like personal things, and they ramble, and then they try to one-up somebody else's comment, or they're rude. You know, there's a lot of weird interpersonal dynamics that happen in conversation that doesn't tend to happen when you write. You're more thoughtful and careful. So they write 2 or 3 sentences, and we just take 10 minutes at the start of class to do it. So it's really fast. And then we go around the room, and I started a different person every time, and they just read what they wrote. And sometimes they go on a little tangent and explain what they wrote. And it's been remarkable. Like, the level of discourse has been so much better than just a free-for-all discussion. So maybe you guys already are starting at that level because you write online, and then you come in and talk about it. But what I find also very interesting is that you see the recurring, the thing that's the most repeated that way. So without everybody knowing what you think and what you think, I think the same thing, and 4 of you won't, and you can tell, which you can't tell when you just talk about it. So it's very interesting. So for this one, they weren't allowed to say what their work was about, and the assignment was they had to take a scientific fact or theory and make a visual response to it. Totally open. They could use any medium they want. They could do whatever they wanted. So she's interested in hybrid animals. So this is an albino mouse. I think it's hybrid animals. I can't even understand the science students in the class half the time, to be honest. I just don't even know what they're talking about, which is interesting, and I do ask lots of questions, and they've never had a critique. So it's been very interesting. They didn't have a critique before this one. And then this polar bear is a hybrid between a grizzly and a polar bear. And I can't remember does anybody know what the mouse is a hybrid of? I can't remember what she said. Is an albino mouse just a hybrid anyway? You don't know? Anyway. So she wants to do these studies of them, and we didn't know what it was about, but we were a little confused about, okay, so why are they the same scale? First of all, you know, the bear is this huge thing and has more power than the mouse, and to make the bear smaller makes it seem like, well, maybe the mouse is stronger, and maybe in scientific studies it carries more weight for studies than bears. You know, we were all just reaching for reasons. Formally, we thought they should both be on the brown paper. The mouse, I don't know if you guys all think this, the whole class thought the mouse was far better than the bear. Not only because of how it's drawn, I think it is a more elegant drawing, but the space around it, the juxtaposition between the brown paper and the white mouse makes the mouse like pop. It makes it feel more dimensional. The bear kind of feels like it's flattening out into the paper, especially with the use of the rubbing, the shading that she tried to do around it, and it goes off the page. It doesn't feel like it's actually a bear. And if she really does want to do this sort of taxonomic study of different animals, it would be really good to do them, I think, all the same way, and for comparisons, or figure out a scale system. You know, so she's enlarging the mouse, but she's shrinking the bear, and so like to what degrees are you doing that? But it did really hold people's attention. Is it coming back up? Okay, there it is. And she took the criticisms. She definitely agreed the brown paper. We also I don't know if you can see, it's folded, like there's folds in it. That's kind of considered sloppy. I mean, you have to assume that everything people do is intentional when they put the work out there. So she should be careful, right? And if it's putting tape down on a bigger piece of paper and then trimming it down so it's really clean and nice, and just because especially when you're dealing with visual language or visual work, every detail in that visual thing matters. So you got to be able to read it, you got to be able to see it, you have to be able to understand it. None of us even commented on her initials on the bottom front corner. Personally, I don't like that, but that's a subjective aesthetic thing. I'm just going to go, can I just hit this arrow?
Yep.
Sorry.
Okay.
And then I'm going to have you guys talk about the next act. I'm not sure. Okay, not this one, but so I will have you talk about it, but not this slide. So this was a student, and she actually hung this piece of paper up next to the work. And it said, this project was inspired by medications that are commonly used in third world countries but are hard to obtain due to financial resources. I crushed the pills into powder and mixed it into acrylic medium to create my own paint. And then this was what was hanging up next to that text. So we already understand mostly what this piece is about, right? Or maybe we don't. So what would be some of the things you guys would say about this visual representation of that text? How do you think it works? What don't you think works?
Can you give us the text again, just for a second?
Yeah.
Just left arrow.
The project was inspired by medications that are commonly used in third world countries but are hard to obtain due to financial resources. I crushed the pills into powder and mixed it into acrylic medium to create my own paint.
Uh-huh. So I'm kind of a analytic person, so I'm looking for some indication of dollars or monetary things and not finding it.
Mhm.
So not feeling like that necessarily will connect directly with one of the meanings of the intended meanings.
Mm-hmm.
What was the original scale?
Oh, they're about like this. Yeah, they're not that big. They're those like canvas boards you can buy.
So I feel like if they had been very big, then maybe you would have gotten that, that feeling of this is something that's so easy for us to obtain but isn't easy to obtain elsewhere. But if they're kind of small, I don't know that I would necessarily feel that.
Yeah, that message comes through. That's a powerful message. We use it here for just paint.
Yeah.
And over there, they can't save their lives.
Yeah.
Right, well, so that is a comment that several people did say was just by the nature of doing this is a statement of how privileged we are, right? That she can take these pills and crush them and put them into acrylic paint and make this and hang it in an art class is kind of ridiculous, right? I mean, I don't want to say unethical, nobody used that word, but it's a question, right? And I think she was aware of that and she wanted to push it. But so that's But in itself, in terms of its representation, it's not showing any sort of relationship between like privilege and poverty or first, third world, right? It's just the material. What else about it? Like, how is it painted? What about the colors? A lot of people talked about the colors. Do they read as anything to you? Do they have meaning to you?
The pink and brown separated by a thin white stripe, it almost looks like a pail in and of itself.
Uh-huh.
If you look
Like a
at-
little
Yeah.
capsule. Uh-huh. Nobody said that in our crib. So, anybody else about the colors? So,
Brown's a little like mud, maybe.
uh-huh, mud. So people were talking about the brown being sort of primal or dirt or could touch upon race, but also it's like excrement, especially how it's painted. It's not beautiful, right? And the pink is Pepto-Bismol. But even if you didn't know it was Pepto-Bismol, people said it's that Pepto-Bismol pink. And pink, whether you want to believe it or not, it is a very gendered color. It's just the most gendered color. Everybody sort of, at least in Western society, associates with the feminine. Brown is not necessarily masculine, but because it's next to the pink, it kind of reads like a gendered binary here. But that doesn't make sense with the text she put up, right? So there's this question. So people had so this was where we ended up with this, and you know, a lot of people repeated these sorts of things, and I'm focusing on the majority. Is that the idea was fantastic to take the pill, like where the departure point was great to come up with this idea, but we don't get the idea at all in the work. You have to have that text next to it to even know what she's doing. And so how do you convey that in the work itself, which is what we're trying to do in the art class. You guys would probably have a graph or a comparison to side by side of what they do, you know, who can't get it. So what a lot of us suggested was maps, like have a map of the world and paint with this pigment on the map which countries can't get it, or paint really thickly on the United States and Europe and other countries that have these medicines, and really water it down in the countries that can't get it, and have it maybe even in circles, like concentric circles, where it's denser, just different, like actually use the map, and it would really convey, you'd understand the relationship on the map so much quicker and really clearly, and you might not even need the text. I mean, you'd need the text in some ways specifically. What was interesting was later on in the class, when 3 students did presentations on artists, we learned that acrylic paint, when it was first made, it was made after World War II, it was toxic. And people actually got really sick using it, which I didn't know. So that it was after the critique, though, that we found that out. But that added another whole layer to this, that these are medicines. So it's ibuprofen, by the way, on the left, or Advil, one of those, and Pepto-Bismol on the right, which was surprising to me because I thought they were going to be like super expensive drugs for some reason. And to know they were just standard over-the-counter things that people can't even get, which of course I know is true in the world. But my mind went to the extreme with the text, and then the visual was kind of a surprise. So that was nice for us visually. But you know, the painting references Jackson Pollock. You all probably know him, one of the most famous artists. But splatter, action painting, American expressionism. It just doesn't work with the idea. The reference to him makes no sense with what this piece is trying to talk about. So that was another thing that was said.
And you're talking about having kind of the description of this and having the maps
Mm-hmm.
onto, in our class, there's going to be the question of where is this data situated? What's the context? What are the legends that describe the colors, but also what are the legends that describe the areas? And that's something that we're going to learn along the way.
Yeah, so I'm actually glad you just used that word context, because it's something that I always talk about in my critiques, and there's lots of different ones, right? So there's the context in which the piece was made. So this is very much about the Pepto-Bismol and the Advil, which is a mass-produced commodity, blah, all these things. And then there's the context of reception. So if she displayed this in a hospital, it would have probably a very different emotional response than on an art classroom wall, right? Or if it's an ad in a magazine, or it's a piece out in public that you stumble upon. The context of production and the context of reception matters. So I'm sure if you had to convey a certain idea in a literary peer-reviewed journal, you would do it one way than if it was going to be in the DTH. right? Because it's just a different audience and different levels of people understanding what you're trying to convey. So it's something to think about. Do you think about your audience or not? I think you all have to in what you're doing. The artist doesn't necessarily have to, because many of them are narcissistic and horrible. I'm kidding. This one was one of the best pieces. Everybody loved this piece. She is Ash Conrad. Actually, this one was Reethy. I can't remember her last name. And this is Ash Conrad, and she is a double major in studio art and I think biology, but she wants to be a medical illustrator, a scientific illustrator in the future. That's what she really wants to do. She's completely committed and obsessed. And so she works in a lab here and asked the guy she works for, and I don't know his name, if she could have this old light box, which normally sits flat down, right? And you look at images from above. And she turned it on its side, so it's like a suitcase. So like, you know, you could walk with this. And it's not a great image because it's impossible to shoot something like this, but she covered it with black paper and inserted petri dishes, and then she drew with bacteria this image. And those stripes are not in it. The stripes are there because of my iPhone taking the picture. So I don't know how to explain why that happens. But so the bacteria, she did the same sort of drawing in each petri dish, but each petri dish was changed. They were changed because of the nature of the bacteria. She did it like 2 days before the critique. So they grew or whatever they do. I wish she was here to tell you. And so if you came to this piece in a gallery and your parents or whoever you were with asked you, well, why is this art? Or what is this trying to say? What would you say to that person? How would you talk about it? This is the image. And so each image kind of looks like this. I didn't have a detail of each one. Do you think it's art?
Asking the wrong crowd.
I mean, it's the challenging thing is always like, how do you know if there is a notion of like, is there correctness about how you're interpreting it, or is there not correctness, or like, like, if you sit really hard and think about just about anything, you can project meaning onto it.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you know? Yeah.
So it works in terms of it does provide you something to project.
Right. So like and then and especially the context of being in an art gallery, or you would there's that context, and so
Right.
it's
Right.
asking you to like think about it. But then is there a notion of? It seems like there is, but it's a little fuzzy. If there's a notion of like, well, I'm understanding what it's meant. Does it matter if I take the same meaning as the artist did? I don't know. So there are all those questions that.
Mm-hmm. And you don't have that experience when you do your visual images, do you? In this context, in your computer science world? I mean, is there space for interpretation?
Correctness.
So in this class, the assignments will be designed to answer particular questions.
Mm-hmm.
And the questions will be laid out ahead of time, so everybody will know what the questions are. And so really it is a matter of, does this effectively answer this question?
Right.
Right? And so there is a well-defined criteria.
Uh-huh.
It's not, most of the things that we deal with as computer scientists and mathematicians are, I can form this proof and show that this happened, or I can write this algorithm and guarantee that it's correct against specifications. Whereas since we're showing the human visual system, there aren't those hard and fast rules.
Uh-huh.
So we're a little bit out of our comfort zone,
Mm-hmm.
even just talking about drawing pictures, because there's trade-offs, and you can't come up with an equation for why you should pick, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like, well, contrast is useful for high detail, but sometimes I need the high detail over here, so we have to, but kind of attaching meaning to things.
Mm-hmm.
I could jump off a cliff and say, this is showing that you're trying to manipulate nature to make it do what you want, but it gets away and does its own thing a little bit at the beginning, but maybe a lot over time. But you know, who knows?
I don't even remember. I think it was different stages. So the third one was in there longer, and the second one was in there short. You know, and the first one was the shortest. So I think that is what she was demonstrating. But I think the interesting thing with this, and whether it's art or not, is that you're actually using the object. You're using the petri dish and the real bacteria instead of an image of that thing, which is a real different experience for any viewer or reader, right? If they can somehow see the real thing, it's kind of more convincing, right? It's like an untouched photograph versus an analog versus digital in a way. I mean, I don't know if that's so true. But the other thing that I think is interesting is that normally this is used to look at like an X-ray or some transparency of some sort of scientific thing. but it's been turned on its side literally. And so I think she's trying to merge this scientific realm over here and this artistic realm over here, and not necessarily critique them, but merge them literally in this piece. And so I think it was really successful in that way. So in some ways, the scientific idea was the bacteria thing, but I think there was almost a bigger idea of, okay, well, if you were going to reproduce that in a magazine, you would just probably have those images of the bacteria, right, in a black box. But the fact that it was lit up, it was illuminated from behind, and she had blacked it out, and it was standing up like this suitcase, and you could take it around. It was like this traveling salesman of disease or science. I mean, it was very interesting. So it just kind of expands the meaning of it. I think that might be the last image that, oh yeah. But the other thing I wanted to say, I meant to say at the very beginning, was that a lot of people who've never had critiques, which are, you know, often half my class has never had a critique or participated in a critique, it's really important to think about, okay, so there are several things that can happen. Sometimes students don't say anything, and then it's their turn, and you can tell they're like on the edge of their seat wanting to listen to everything you all have to say, but they didn't contribute to anybody else's, and it's not fair, and it's really hard. And so you have to be like a team player and a generous person in your comments. You have to, if you want to get good comments and critical comments that are going to help your work get better, you have to be able to offer those to people. And that's just like the ground rule, and I always say that. And you also have to do it in a respectful way. So with your field, this probably doesn't get too emotional, but in art, it can get incredibly emotional. I mean, people make work about their child abuse, right? Or lots of things. Just believe me, I've seen everything in my class. And so you have to be very sensitive about how you communicate criticism to people about emotional content. I think in your field, it might not be the same, but there is a way of being professional.
We have this very strong defensiveness, don't want to ever tell me I'm wrong, right?
Uh-huh.
I'd rather die than be wrong, right? And so there's this affective response, and it doesn't really matter what it is. It's like, oh, your picture's upside down. Oh, no, I meant to do that because let me think of some reason.
Right, well, you get that from the art students as well.
Okay.
Oh, I wanted the paper to be ripped. It was deliberate, you know, it's supposed to show the time element, and you're like, come on. And yeah, so there is a defensiveness too, but I think what I always try to say is that it's not wrong. Like failure, I never use the word failure, it's research.
Yeah.
So you're not wrong. You're conducting research, and you've got to maybe get 3 wrongs before you get to the right. And I think there's a lot of space between the wrong and the right, right? I mean, a lot of research is not solving the thing you're researching. You're just adding to the discourse of trying to figure something out. So I think it's really smart to not think about, don't take it personally like you're wrong, but you're on one step. So everybody should be trying to help everybody get closer to the end result. That more, I think the most important thing for me as an art teacher, and I don't know if it's for you, is to communicate, to be able to communicate what it is you want to communicate.
Mm-hmm.
In art, you might not want to communicate anything. I mean, it could just be you want to just communicate that you did this, like action painting, right? But often people want to communicate something really profound. And you have to be able to communicate whatever that question is that you have to demonstrate visually somehow. And so how do you successfully do that? And, you know, I'm not looking at the examples of what you do. You know, like I personally, as a visual person, I love this. This is from your class, I guess. This image is just like a beautiful image. So I would want to look at this. And there's a lot of debate, not debate, but I think a lot of people have described my work as beautiful, but it's about horrible things. And so I get questioned about that a lot. And I think beauty is an incredible strategy. It's a better strategy. To make something ugly about something ugly might just make people look away. So I would want to kind of look at this and know what I'm looking at, because it's seductive visually, right? I mean, the black space, and it's almost like a planet, and it's almost topographical, the way the color, I don't even know what this is. You know,
It actually is the topography of this planet, so you're right on.
Oh,
after time.
okay, so it looks like that, but it's beautiful. And so even in that way that it looks like that, I can relate to it as someone on this planet. And so how do you accomplish, did you do this?
No.
No. So how do you know that this is working versus it not working? You know, like, so if this was in black and white, I probably wouldn't want to go see what it was, right? So color is, all the formal aspects of what you're doing are super important. And I mean, I don't know what those all are for you, but you know, we talk about space and form and texture and color and dynamism and asymmetry and symmetry, and does it go off the page, and is it centered, and do you make more of them? Should there be a series? Should it be bigger? Should it be smaller? Should there be things, because if you just have like something like this on your paper, it's like floating nowhere, but as soon as you put something else, there's a relationship, right? So, and that relationship changes no matter how many you use or where you place them on the page, and so composition and all those sorts of formal words are the words we use like all the time. But for me, and I think there's probably camps in your field too. There's people who say, oh, art is just visual. We don't need to talk about it, there's no concept. And I'm of the mind that there's always a concept. Even if your concept is you don't want it to be about anything, that's a concept, right? I mean, you can't experience the feeling of non-existence if you are existing. And it's the same sort of dilemma. So I think you have to, I lost my train of thought there. But so all those things really factor into it. So that's what I was gonna say. I always talk about these formal terms, but it's always in service of the idea. Always in service of the intent. So even if you don't want to say idea, intent. So even if you just want to express the energy you had when you made this huge painting, that you express that in the painting, in which, in that one of this would not express like energy, really. It's kind of flat and all over, right? So if that is what you wanted to express, how would you do that? So that's a half hour. I'm going to stop there, but I'm happy to take questions from you or talk to you about it, or if you wanted to show me something that one of you have done and we could look at it together or whatever, I don't know what you would like to do.
So can we go back to the first one?
Yeah.
And one of the things I wanted to mention here was that I like that you talked about everything being important, right? So here the background was important. That's one of the things that we're going to see. And I also like that you mentioned everything is a choice, and you should make that choice for a reason, right?
Yes.
And so when you're kind of defending, even if you win the contest, I've got the best poster, I'm going to be asking you, why did you pick that background color, right? And the answer shouldn't be, pick a background color, right? And don't make, that should be the answer if that was the answer, right? But you should ahead of time be thinking about, where did I put the legend? Why did I put the legend? Why did I pick this color map? Why did I choose these bandings? What was the viewpoint? Was it zoomed in and off the frame, or was it focused? I mean, all these things help convey a message. In our case, it's more a particular scientific answer message than an effective kind of emotional message. But all these things, I think, still apply.
Yeah, and the truth is, she didn't answer it per se, but she probably used that brown paper because that's what she could get at the studio supply store, and the white paper she had, right? But it's really worth the effort to think about. And I didn't say this to her, it's just come to me here, is that wouldn't it have been interesting if she actually used some sort of substrate that was in the field of animal? Like, what do they use when they study animals? I don't know. Like, is it graph paper? Is it X-ray film? What maybe if she had painted it on a sheet of X-ray film, that would be really incredible, and it would add this whole other powerful layer of meaning. Now, I know all your stuff will be online, so it's just, that's the medium that you're using, but there's a lot within that, right? Is it interactive? Is it moving? Can people engage with it? All those are really good questions in that field, right?
Can you talk a couple more kind of issues relating to the mechanics of critique in terms of strategies for making it more effective, things to avoid to make it less effective?
Yeah, so I struggle with the critiques, and so this is a great book. I mean, it's in the art field, but if it's an easy read, and it's all in that PDF I sent you. So I would suggest reading it. Okay. He has a lot of suggestions, but there's this one guy out in California who does like endless critiques for like 6 hours, literally, or 12 hours, and students come and go, they get food, they bring their pets, they fall asleep, and it just goes on and on and on until it's organically over. And I love that idea, but there's no way I'm going to do that, or we can do it here, because you can't at UNC, but this is I think at Cal Arts or something. But there is this, usually an artificial, arbitrary time set, right? So on every Wednesday night, and actually, I don't know if I can do this, I'll let you know. I would like to invite you guys to come, but I have to just check with my chair. Every Wednesday night from 6 to 9, we do a critique of 3 graduate students' work, and it's at the art lab in the big clean room, which is about as big as this room, but it's all white walls and it has lights, and they're actually pretty great in terms of the work's great. Our grad students are really good. And they're an hour each one. And I've been kvetching about this ever since they started this a few years ago, because I think it's an arbitrary time, and when it's an hour, people don't, when you sit and you write something down, you collect your thoughts and you respond, and it's an hour, people just kind of kick back and they wait and they see what people are going to say, and then they echo somebody else's thought, and it's not really driven or inspired, and it's also not organic, because you know you have this time. And so I'm always arguing for, let's just do them. And maybe the first one ends in 20 minutes, and maybe the second one's 70 minutes, and maybe the last one's 2 minutes. I mean, sometimes people put up crap, excuse me, but you know, sometimes they just put up stuff that they haven't spent any time on, and we're supposed to spend an hour talking about that. You know what I mean? So I think it should be more organic. And so usually in my class, I don't time them. And now that we've been doing the writing thing, it usually ends up everybody's kind of equals out, because if you go around the whole room and you all say what you've written, it's going to be about the same amount of time. Sometimes the conversations after that go on longer, but it's very organic, and I think that I've found that's way better. I had about 20 students in my class last semester. We had to time them just to get through everybody because we'd run out of time, and that was really hard. Like, they were all like 7 minutes, and it was just, but it was good in terms of like really focusing us to get to the meat of the matter right away, instead of, you know, chit-chatting. But and then I think it's also good to mix it up, to not always do it the same way. So I had them write this time, but I think next time, I'm not sure, I might have the students actually write a short paragraph about what they're doing and send it to us beforehand so we can think about it, or, you know, or even have them read something in here about critique and then come into the critique. I think it's good to not have it be so rote and so, you know, just the same thing. It gets boring. I think people get bored of routine. I'm trying to think of other.
All right. Thank you so much for coming today.
Yeah,
Appreciate
you're
it.
welcome. So you're going to talk now?
I am.
Okay, I'm going to listen. Or do I have to listen?
You don't have to listen. You're welcome to listen.
What are you talking about?
I'll hold on a second and I'll show you.
So you guys are all grad students, right?
I'm an undergrad,
Oh, you're an undergrad. What year are you?
junior.
Cool.
All right, so in this class we go from a theoretical level down to a practical level, theoretical level back to practical. Today we're doing a theoretical level on how do you display things to the human visual system that makes them pop out and easy to see. And as always, we open the class with some example videos of different things to kind of give us a repertoire of ideas to bring to our designs. And so the first one today.
In this video clip, we will focus on tracked features. These describe some statistic computed for a single fiber tracking result, such as average fiber length or track volume. Since the threshold space is continuous, we cannot hope to compute a tracked feature value for each threshold combination.
All right, so context. This is a brain. This is water as it moves around inside the brain, how it diffuses. They use magnetic resonance to understand this. And if it's more directed in one direction than another, it happens along the fiber tracks that connect parts of the brain to the other. So this is kind of how this brain is wired. And the question is, how is this brain wired?
Large. For this reason, we sample the threshold space on a rectilinear grid
and this threshold space is in the algorithm they use to compute these tracks. There's parameters, and you're trying to figure out which ones that I want to see and kind of what the two different parameters should be that show me the ones I want to see. So they've linked the 3D view that shows kind of what the results are with a parameter view and then some histograms that show you kind of how much of each of these are in different ranges, right? So you can, you know, figure out which location you are here in 2D, which is picking two of these axes to pull out the ones you wanted to see.
compute tracked feature values for the sample points only. This results in a 2D image, which we call the feature map, that can be displayed in the feature map view on the bottom right of the UI. To reduce the computational time, we limit the feature map resolution to 30.
And then here we've got a color map, which is showing another data value, the second column, on top of the geometry that they extracted that was the particular ones.
32 by 32 grid points and used by linear information to preserve the continuous nature of the underlying threshold space. The feature map view has similar interaction possibilities as the color map view. By default, the average fiber length is shown in the feature map. The feature values drop smoothly as the threshold value gets higher. If we select the standard deviation of fiber lengths, there seem to be some regions with constant color. This may indicate that the tracked feature is somewhat less sensitive to threshold variations. This would be a good thing. A tracked feature which is insensitive to user parameters is well suited for quantitative comparisons between different subjects.
All right, so what they're using this visualization for is to come up with an algorithm that will work across subjects, right? And so the idea here is to understand the space of all algorithms, the features they pull out, and whether they work across a robust set. And so there's, different brightness showing one value here, color showing another value there, to give you understanding, are they the right length, are they highly variable, as well as showing where they show up in space, so you can use this to tune the parameters to your algorithm. So our geography data set that we're going to be using for homework 2 is similar to this, that she wants to tune the parameter for the geography to see what she wants to see in the information. And so we'll be doing something a little bit similar to that in the next homework.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
So what we just looked at, is that something you just showed a class, or is that something online?
So that was something that was presented at a conference, along with a paper describing that method.
Okay.
Yeah, so almost all of these are from the VisWeek conference, and you can get a lot of them online, or we could get them through the on-campus libraries. All right, so this is one of the visualization contests. It was from several years ago. It's looking at a jet in space. It's kind of a high-speed gas jet and how it kind of modifies over time. This is a side slice view of that 3D time-varying thing. This is going to be a 3D view. It'll update in time. And this is something called parallel coordinates, right? So parallel coordinates are playing a data set that's got more than one, value at every location in space, right? So here's total particle density at a location. Here's the temperature at a location. Here's the mass abundance at a location. All of these different values are at a particular point. If you select a range here in yellow, it shows where it maps to the other coordinates, right? So you can see correlations between total particle density and other measures, and you can see here in yellow where those are, right? This is showing where yellow they are in 3 space. This is showing where they are in 2 space. So the blue is everything else, and the yellow is that. So you can kind of see the blue versus yellow, how these form 2 groupings of things. So if you're trying to extract what is about a shock front, for example, you might want to pick things that are on the shock front and see if they're correlated throughout the different things. So this is like the gas temperature, how much helium-2 there is, how much hydrogen there is, how much different components there are in this particular simulation. And there's a time step you can run forward and kind of see how this maps throughout. So again, this is a case where we've got a 2D slice view showing us highly detailed what you can't see inside there, but a 3D overview that gives you an idea of how these relate to each other, that they're packed inside each other, and kind of an abstract view all coupled together. So if you brush on one, you see in the other. If you brush on the other, you see in the one. You can do parallel coordinates in ParaView. It's not something I'm going to be talking about in the homeworks, but it's something to consider if you've got a data set that matches this kind of a need.
And what is this a simulation of, did you say? An
So
airplane
this
jet?
is a hypersonic, supersonic jet in interstellar media, kind of forming into kind of what would be eventually a star.
Oh.
All right. And the third, I'm going to skip because we're a little behind today, and so, oh well. So homeworks. Homework 1, Thursday by midnight. Again, this is the most complicated homework procedure we have. You put a zip file with all the things that you're going to turn in, and you upload to the FTP site. You go to the WordPress site after you've completed your design, and you write up and you post those. No peeking ahead of time because there's no way I have to hide the other ones. Then from Friday to Monday, you're going to comment on 4 other ones. The 2 that are numbered higher than you and the 2 that are numbered lower than you. Wrap around if you get to the end, right? And you're going to be doing a critique on there, right? And so the first part of your critique will be, this was my favorite part of this visualization. And then the next part will be, here's the things that I would suggest improving, right? And again, it will be about the article. So for example, we might make the background color be brown instead of white because it helps bring out the mouse, would be an example of what we saw here. It's good to give comments on that in terms of where's guidelines or guidelines I gave you in the class. Here's the reason for thinking about that being better. And you're gonna have those same comments in your write-up that describes your image. Here's why we chose all these different things. Why we chose background color, why we chose a slice versus a, a height field versus a color map, and so forth. All right? And then I'll post homework 2 by Thursday. I'm madly converting the data today. All right.
Do we both post onto WordPress or just one per group?
One per group.
Okay.
Good question. And one upload per group.
What's that?
One upload zip file per group.
Okay, okay.
And then you send me an email, each person doing your partner review.
Okay.
All right, pop quiz. What are the 4 types of scalar fields?
You do verbal class quizzes?
Yeah, no grades. Yeah. Made you think about it, right?
Yeah. I always have them written, that's a good idea.
Which is the pizza? Small, medium, large. Oh. Term we use is ordinal, ordered, but you don't know what the magnitudes are. Yeah. Earnable, ratio, and then nominal, right? Just names, right? People in a class. Nobody's better than the other. All right.
Thank you.
Yep.
That what you just showed looked amazing.
Excellent.
I definitely want a team teacher. It would be incredible.
What continuous color map shows interval data well?
There isn't one.
There isn't one. That's right.
I was going to say the rainbow colors.
Just to tweak me. I love it. What data type is best mapped to transparency?
Uncertainty.
Right, because you can't see what's there, uncertain, right? And of course, what's the average airspeed velocity of a swallow? That's the right answer. All right. So today we're going to talk about attracting the attention of the user to the place you want to see them to see, because that's where the data that they want to see is. How do you get its attention? How do you attend in visual details, see patterns, and do this all in a fraction of a second, right? So if you're doing a video, they only have a fraction of a second to see the thing that you want them to see. I think about this as Lord of the Rings, right? And so, the ring bearer, wherever he is on the Middle Earth, puts on the ring, boom, the eye of Sauron is looking right at them. All the people are converging on this ring bearer, takes it off, invisible, right? Okay? But this same hobbit can be walking around, 10 meters away from the eye of Sauron with goblin clothes on, and the eye can't see where the heck he is, right? So you want to be like the ring bearer for your visualization, not like the little goblin cover, so that the user can see the thing that they needed to see. And so how do we do that? So how does the eye move when it's looking around, right? There's a couple different motions. One is saccades, so I'll look at one particular person and then jump over and saccade from one face to another, right? And so in between, when I'm doing the motion, I don't see anything, right? So if you happen to show something while the user is saccading, they're not going to see it because their visual system is turned off in that time. And then you refocus and conversion diverge. Then there's smooth pursuit. So if I look at a particular person but walking or turning my head or they're moving, I'll stay locked on that particular face and there won't be a saccade, so I can pay attention to that. So if there's kind of a moving thing in your visualization that's moving as a group, you can still pay attention to that and not have saccades. All right, so how large is this field of view, right? So you might say, okay, well, I showed it somewhere on the screen. I don't know why they didn't see it, right? It turns out that there's this concept of the useful field of view, and it depends somewhat on what you're doing. So for reading text, the fovea is about the size of one word, right? I guess that's why we have words about the size that they are. If you make them too much bigger, you can't bring them in one saccade. If you're looking for patterns, it can be much larger. A forest, an ocean, you can see that over a larger area. It turns out that you can't say, oh, well, good, all I can do is shrink everything down so it fits in the fovea, right? Well, it turns out that it scales with the number of targets, right? And so if you have more targets in the target area, you'll actually reduce your useful field of view. And as your cognitive stress increases, it also decreases, right? So if you're designing a visualization for someone who's in a very stressful situation, you need to realize that they're not going to be able to see as many things in that visualization as if they were in a calm situation. And so kind of scaling down to minimizing the number of things they need to pay attention to will help do the decision better. All right, so there's 4 requirements for kind of getting somebody's attention if you want to get them. One is easily perceived, even in outside attention focus, right? So color change is probably not going to be it because outside the attention focus we don't see color. It can be ignored but continually reminds, right? It's not so irritating that it makes the use of your visualization unpleasant, and displays levels of urgency, right? So the example I use for this is, my sister's got nephews. When they were little, they had a protocol, right? They come up to mom, mom's having a conversation. So first they put hand on mom's, arm, and then if nothing, then they, wiggle a little bit, and then they start wiggling a lot more, right? And eventually she'll pay attention to the child. But they don't just come in and scream, "Ah, ah, ah, ah," right? This is not useful. So how can we have a visualization tool that will kind of get your attention, if it's more and more urgent, kind of give you more and more attention over time, without flashing things going over all over the place? So what doesn't work? A small target in the periphery, right? So some small thing that shows up somewhere in the image. I'm sorry, I'm glad you drew it for them, but that's not going to show them the thing they wanted to see. Changes in color outside fovea, things that happen while they're saccading. And so, for example, there used to be a mail program on our X servers. There was a little mailbox, and when new mail came in, this little flag went from down to up, right? So it was small, it was a part of the screen, and if it happened while you were saccading, you never saw it. And so not a very effective way to show you that there was new mail coming in. Auditory cues work very well. There was an example of doing this with fighter pilots, right? They would not notice that some other kind of person had a missile lock on their aircraft. This is a fairly important thing to tell you about. And so they would actually have the daughter of the pilot say, "Daddy, missile lock," and that would kind of get their attention, and they would go do this. Probably don't want to do that for every user, but think about auditory cues if something's going on besides just visual cues. Motion field, usual field of view is bigger than static field. So something moving out here, you can actually get your attention even if it's further outside the fovea. What's going on? Blinking, which can be slightly irritating if there's things blinking all the time, or moving targets. And if you code the urgency to motion velocity so that it gets more and more urgent, you can really do that in an effective way. All right. If we stick to the question of we want to show displays data all across the whole screen so the user can attend to whatever they want to see, then we have the question of how do we encode the data, right? And so it turns out that there's certain features you can use to display data that cause objects to pop out. So even across the whole screen, you can see those things very quickly. There's several categories of these: form, color, motion, and spatial position. And we're going to go through each of those next. So form, there's orientation, right? So if you look at the picture in the upper right, and all those things are oriented one way and one's different, you can immediately tell it. And it's mostly independent of the number of distractors that there are there. Length and width kind of form a common space structure, but again, you can see differences in length, differences in width very easily across the scene. Collinearity of lines is something that you can see very easily, where there's one that's not collinear. Size, right, the bigger dot compared to the smaller. Curvature, one not curved, the other curved. Grouping, and so there's kind of either objects that are inside or out, or how many objects are in a group. You can do up to 4. So basically beyond 4, you get 1, 2, 3, 4, and then more, right? And so you can count to find out what's going on. Adding marks, but interestingly not subtracting marks, so you can see that there's more there. And then number, and then blur, right? And so if you have objects that are blurred versus not blurred, you can pre-attendedly go and see these are the ones that I'm looking for. All right. We talked about before color outside the envelope, right? And so here is kind of the red objects in a field of white are very easy to pick out, whereas you couldn't pick them out above, based on just shape. Kind of out in intensity, brighter versus darker. Here is hue outside the envelope, right? So you can see the red things in the field of green things, even though the intensity is not outside the field. 2D position, stereoscopic depth. Something that's very surprising to me is you can do concave versus convex. So you needed to kind of figure out where the light source was, figure out the shape from shading, understand the shape of the object, and then know these are different, right? But that all happens very, very rapidly. Interestingly, if you turn the picture upside down, then all of those look like bumps, dimples, and the one looks like a bump, because we assume the lighting source from above. And in motion fields, there's kind of flicker and direction of motion. So these are all channels you can use to separate out different features of objects. But not everything. And so again, if the color or brightness is within the convex hull of the other objects, you can't quickly pick them out. You have to look around and see where they are. Not junction, right? So two of these things don't touch each other at the corners, but you can't tell that without looking around, kind of each one seeing what's going on. And then parallelism. right? And so here it's like 2 of these lines are parallel in there, and you have to kind of check each one to do that. Now, orientation, if they were all oriented in one move, you could see it, but here, 2 things, whether they're parallel, there's no apparently detectors for that. All right. And not all at once, right? So if you try to do all these things in the same image, your kind of pre-attended tuning falls apart a bit. You can start looking for one of these or another of those, but not kind of seeing which of these is different if they're all different. Also, stereo distinctness, as there are more layers, it's harder to tell exactly which layer something is in and separate them. All right, so which is most distinct? It depends, right? So rules of thumb, adding marks is better than removing them. More than 4 items require counting, and the color has to be outside the convex hull of the others to be kind of predeterminedly attended to. All right, so here was the convex hull picture that we saw in the previous lecture as well. So combining features, it turns out that almost, this is annoying, right? This is great, we'll just use this and show the data, and we'll look for conjunctions. And searches are not mostly pre-attentive, so square and gray, you can either look for the gray things and find through to see the square one, or look for the square things and look through and find to see the gray ones. Now it's interesting that you can pick which of those you want to do, right? So you're kind of picking a filter for what did I want to look at first, and this is why having a bunch of them at the same time makes it start to break down, because your filter can't be an and filter, it has to be kind of looking for one of these at a time. You can, though, combine color and shape with spatial. So you can have a gray ellipse and where they are in space, a gray ellipse and how they're grouped, a gray ellipse and stereo depth, and shape and motion, right? And so these are ones, if you need to show 2 or 3 things and quickly look for these conjunction searches, these are the ones to kind of pick early on. All right, so how does this actually work? It turns out that there's an incredible number of specialized receptors in our earlier visual system that basically are looking for all of these features, right? There's detectors for each location in the retina, several scales at each location, so there's a small dot here, a bigger dot here, a big dot here. There's on-center, off-surround, so looking for edge detection at every place in the image. Elongated blobs with a particular orientation, so line segments, bits of line at different orientations, at different sizes all over our retina. And so they're all in there waiting, and then when they see something, they go, me, 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 right? And then you can kind of pick up on what's going on, right? And so the orientation, there's ones that turn orientation, there's one going me, 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 nobody else is. Parallelism, now we have trouble, right? They're all me, 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 me everywhere, and now you have to go looking for, okay, who are the ones that are exactly the same in the same area. And then each of these is tuned to a particular kind of grapheme. And so, think about it this way. We've got this kind of whole field. There's things looking for red things looking for white things, big things, small things, different orientations, different thicknesses. Velocity, right? There's things looking for things moving. So you go to the movies and the credits are rolling. The credits stop rolling. It looks like they're moving downward, right? But they're not moving downward. Well, your I'm moving upward ones have gotten tired. Your moving downward ones are no longer tired, and so they're firing more than the moving up ones, and so you think things are moving down, right? These basic groups of neurons are behaving the whole time. All right. Have different levels of features at different places in the image. All right. This operates across scale, and so these basically have sensors with different receptive fields, larger and larger and larger. Larger fields as you go further out from the center. And the color is pretty much only in the center. Motion is pretty much only in the periphery, which is good because motion is then drawing your attention to look at it with the fovea. All right. So it looks like, because of different experiments, you can see that these things operate on a local retina image, right? So what do I mean by that? If you look at the center of this, wait till it restarts, it'll actually give us a video maybe. Yes. Look at the dot in the center. You can see the flickering balls. When they start in motion, you stay looking at the center, they appear to stop flickering, right? But if the next time when it does this, you look not at the center, but look at the periphery and watch a particular ball, you can see it's actually flickering just as much as the other ones were. Why didn't it? There we go. Right? And so if you keep it locally locked, you can tell what's going on with it, but if it's moving across your vision, you don't have an idea that it's difference. The difference detectors aren't operating because there's nothing there anymore for them to operate on, right? And so this happens with, all different kinds of channels. I'm going to jump right to the kind of space channel. Have to wait for this to restart. right, so looking in the middle, astoundingly, they seem to be, because, okay, I have a group of these shapes, they're moving around, whatever, but if you watch a particular one, it's still doing its adjustment even while it's moving. So color, brightness, size, different features. All right, so this is like if the user is pursuing some location in your video, they're going to see these changes. If they're looking over here, they're not actually going to see that there's changes happening over in the different parts of the image if there's motion. All right. So there's this, I mentioned the word grapheme. So the idea here is that there's basically tuned receptors. One of them is a Gabor filter. And so this is a cosine of x times an exponent divided by an exponential. What's that mean? So that means basically that you've got some spatial frequency with a size and orientation. And then you've got kind of a region of space that it responds in. And so you multiply these two and you get this little filter. It's looking for things about this size, about this orientation, about this location. Right? And you've got bigger versions of these and smaller versions of these. It tends to be in our visual system that the lower frequency ones have larger regions and the higher frequency ones have smaller regions. You could have a higher frequency one with a larger region, we just don't have those, right? And so that's not an effective way to try to show information. You can then use this to differentiate different textures, right? And so you can see which ones have particular orientations, which ones have particular sizes, which ones are not oriented at all. So this gives you orientation, scale, and contrast way of looking at encoding textures. All right, so of course you can't measure both size and orientation accurately at the same texture density, right? And so if you have a high density texture and you're changing the orientation locally, you don't get a kind of a repeated pattern. You don't get kind of a standard thing. If you're changing the size, you have a minimum size that you can have for the largest size object you want to see. And so what this means is you can't give a texture that's both high resolution in space and orientation and size, because in a place where you've got a low resolution in size, you can't draw anything else in that location, right? That's a way to think about this. All right, and so again, you can see fine details in small areas, larger features in big areas. So here's a two-value texture map where the field direction is the orientation of the texture, and the field strength is the inverse size, right? So a higher field is a smaller size. Why is it that they would choose that? That seems unnatural. Seems like you want a higher field to be a bigger size.
The shadows from the higher one then block out the smaller.
Right, so if you have a large size, it's going to cover a large area. Yep. And so basically, it turns out that there's high gradient in direction, high change in direction, high field. If you want to have high spatial change in direction, you need to have small size on your texture, because otherwise you just got your texture obliterated in neighbors. So in this case, in order to display rapid changes in direction, they needed to use a small size to show those areas, right? And so here's a case where you picked something that was kind of the unnatural mapping, because the visual system only supports that kind of display. In fact, rendering only supports that. And then here they used a saturated double-ended color scale to also show the magnitude. And the double-ended is because there's positive charges and negative charges, right? And so from the texture itself, you can't tell which of these are positive and negative charges. The color gives you that information. The color is very low resolution, but it doesn't have to be high resolution. The high resolution of the data is coming from the kind of texture filters, and you can mix the two of them together. All right, so Colin talks about having a 4-value texture map where you kind of do orientation, size, contrast, and hue. This is part of the desert we wandered in for years, so I want to see that one working before I would believe it, because we're going to start to get kind of effects of overlapping signals. All right. So before we knew that the texture scale had to vary by a factor of 3 and the texture orientation by 15 or 30 degrees, and the just noticeable difference, it turns out, for texture scale is varying by about 9%, and so a little bit less than 10% size. So if you want to be able to see, yes, this is a difference in the texture size, that's how big of a difference you need to have, and the orientation vary by 5 degrees. Right, so pre-attentively, if you want to see it at a glance, it needs to be by 15 degrees. if you can sit down and pay careful attention to it, you can get down to within 5 degrees. And so depending on what your user has to do, you could pick a finer or a coarser orientation scale. All right. And always have to have at least one perceptual illusion in the class. This is looking at 2 different kind of textures here and here. And of course, I'm going to tell you those are the same size because I always do. And then indeed, they're the same size. Different textures. All right. So now we're going to look at an example of counting the white shirted passes.
This is a test of selective attention. Count how many times the players wearing white pass the basketball. How many passes did you count? The correct answer is 15 passes. But did you see the gorilla?
So how many people did not see the gorilla? Uh-huh. How many people have seen this video before? Yeah. Okay. And so the reason I
It is available.
show you this video is because can't tell you how many times I've heard students say, but I showed them the data, right? I showed them the data. Yes, you may have showed them something that was on the screen, but the question is, did you map it to a channel that they were attending to? Or did you let them know ahead of time to attend to it, right? If I did this in the class one time and I said the wrong thing. I said, count the black-shirted passes. If you count the black-shirted passes, there's a gorilla there. And you're like, there's a gorilla there. Why is there a gorilla in the middle of my video? It was the primary thing I was focusing on. It wasn't a distractor, right? And so we can actually tune our pre-attentive system to be looking for particular things, right? And so one thing this can be useful to is to drive priming. So if your user's looking for some particular thing, show them the thing they're looking for, and then they can be watching the video to see what's going on, right? And so you can let them know, and then let them know what to look for with the legend so they can know what they're seeing, and pick channels that you can pre-attentively see things, right? So this black thing you could have pre-attentively seen, it's just we were looking for the wrong one at that particular time. All right. So who has seen the amazing color changing card trick? All right. Well, we'll do the amazing color changing card trick. Since my gorilla's already been slashed on it.
Hi, I'm Richard, this is Sarah, and we're going to perform the amazing colour-changing card trick with this blue-backed deck of cards. Now the idea is very simple. I'm just going to spread the...
Go to the gear at the bottom.
The gear.
The bottom right.
Let's do this.
Try and enter.
Oh, get that. Good.
It's a big deal.
Hi, I'm Richard, this is Sarah, and we're going to perform the amazing colour-changing card trick with this blue-backed deck of cards. Now the idea is very simple. I'm just going to spread the cards in front of Sarah and ask her to push any card towards the camera.
Okay, let's see. I'm going to go for this card here.
Okay. Now Sarah could have selected any card at all from the deck, but she selected the card which is now face down on the table. What I'm going to ask her to do is show us which card she selected.
Right, so the card that I chose was in fact the 3 of diamonds.
The 3 of diamonds, okay, excellent choice. That card goes back into the deck. Now I'm just going to spread the cards face up on the table. Do a little click of the fingers, and you'll see that Sarah's card here has now got a blue back. Not particularly surprising. What's slightly more surprising is all of the other cards have got red backs. And that is the amazing colour changing card trick. Hi, I'm Richard. This is Sarah, and we're going to perform the
All right.
amazing colour change.
This time you see the gorilla.
Blue back, then open arm.
You realize it's the same group. Okay, so again, this is a case where the thing that I hate about myself is that I don't notice most of what's going on, right? I assume that I can query the environment and things are not changing outside, right? And so if you complain that you showed the user a different background color and they didn't see it, well, that's turns out how people sometimes are. So you can't assume that the user's gonna look at your picture, see everything that's in there, understand everything, remember it for the next time. So if you want to show changes, don't be, look at something, look away, look back, there's something changed. It doesn't work. And so you need to have both the things relatively in the same field of view at the same time or in motion so that they can see what's going on. And so when you're drawing things, you need to kind of keep this in mind. Good. At least I had one video that not everybody in the class had seen this morning. And I will see you on Thursday. Looking forward to having a second assignment out for ready. You and I are racing. I'm racing to get the next one up, and you're racing to get the first one done. So I'll see you then. There we go.